Hi everyone again. I'm glad I can welcome you on my presentation. My name is Miro Michalicka. I work here at Cheppers. Let me tell you something about me first. I have more than 5 years experience with web development and with Drupal specifically for more than 3 years. I'm also a board member of Slovak Drupal Association. Uh, what are we going to talk in this presentation? First, we will talk about API best practices, what you should do if you want to have your API used. Then we will talk about decoupling in general, and then we will look in Drupal specifics of decoupling, and of course, specifically Drupal 7 and then Drupal 8. And in the end, we will get to Drupal 8 and Internet of Things project by myself. Let's start with this API best practices. I took these best practices from Total websites. The first is documentation, because if your API is not well documented, nobody will use it because they don't know what methods should they use, how they should authenticate, etc. There are several tools nowadays which you can use for documenting your API. For example, it's Apiary. It's quite well known nowadays. The other is stability and consistency. If you have ever worked with Facebook API, you know that it's quite a lot rebuild it, so it's not very consistent. You should give users some time to transfer to new version API, and also it's recommended to indicate which version of API is the user using in his calls. You may have more than one version of API. For example, when you start adding new feature, you want to maintain also the older and the new with enhanced features. The other is flexibility. This is more specific for backend systems, because most of API is accessible with JSON in JSON format. But if you are designing a backend application, JSON might be the best format. You might want to use XML for some SOAP communication. Not less important is security. Token authentication is quite well known, and it's broadly used nowadays. There are also some other options like OAuth or I don't know, digest authentication, or maybe if you are working in on project only for intranet, it might be IP authentication. And the last point is ease of adoption, and is mostly summary of the previous points, because if you want your users to use your API, you have to have it well documented. It must be stable, at least for some time. It should be flexible, and it should be secure, because if you are working with personal data, you don't want to leak it somewhere. Now let's start talk about decoupling. In Drupal world, it's more known as Headless Drupal. What it exactly means? It basically means Drupal able to communicate with other services, which might be another Drupal site or some mobile application, kiosk application, desktop, and these other applications should also communicate with each other. What are pros and cons of decoupling? First of all, you will get flexibility of frontend, because if there are some front-end developers in Drupal, you may know that front-end in Drupal isn't very up-to-date, especially in Drupal 7, and is not very flexible too. You may also solve problem of lack of Drupal specialists. It's mostly related to previous one, because not very front-end developers want to work with Drupal front-end. They want to use modern technologies. They want to be up-to-date. It will bring you multi-vendor backend. As I said on previous slide, you can use multiple applications providing data to your final one, which will be presented to end user. And if you design or architecture of your application well, you can use also strength of Drupal backend, and more importantly is back office. You should have separated front-end application for visitors, and you can still use Drupal back office and Drupal backend for editors. The cons are you can lose some of Drupal capabilities. I'm speaking about cases when also front end users want to input some data into your system. Then you can lose, for example, form validation, but it's quite easily doable in front-end layer. What's more important, you can lose SEO optimization, which is provided directly by Drupal. Some SEO things. The other con is multiple requests for resources, because the page consists of multiple elements, and if you have to request for each of these elements separately, but this might not be issue with upcoming HTTP2 protocol. And the last con is growth team, because you will need specialists for each area. So you might need Drupal specialists, front-end specialists as teamer, and then separated front-end specialist like application for Angular or some for some JavaScript framework. What should you do about these cons? You don't have to make fully decoupled applications. There is a solution for it. It's called Big Pipe, and as you can see, with standard Drupal, you will wait 3 to 4 seconds to get page full loaded, and then you can do something with it. And with Big Pipe caching, you will get static elements first, because they are cached for every user, and then you can ask for dynamic content on your page and display it delayed. Now let's talk about Drupal 7 REST capabilities. There are 3 common modules. First is RESTful web services, the other is services itself, and the last one is RESTful module. The first one, RESTful web services, it's based for Drupal8 REST module. What is good about it is it's partially OOP, so you don't have to go through a lot of functions. What's not very good about it doesn't provide versionable API. The other module, services, all of you probably know it. It's probably the most common solution for Drupal 7 decoupling. The process it have active Drupal8 branch, so you can use it in Drupal 8 as well. and it also provides versionable API, but personally I never used this versionable API functionality. I used services module maybe a year ago, and I believe that versionable API weren't available at the time. The cons are procedural code. It don't have to be con in Drupal 7 point of view, because as we all know, Drupal 7 was written in procedural way, so it's like minor con. The last module in Drupal 7 is RESTful module by Gizra, and its pronouns are OOP and versionable API. And I tried to test it sometime, but I haven't found any cons. So we should be really happy about this module. What about Drupal 8? Drupal 8 has REST in the core, but there is always but. Drupal 8 has REST in core, but on the other hand, it doesn't provide versionable API. It's OP because it's Drupal 8, and it has about 60 issues in backlog. Some of them are quite severe, but I will get to some of them later. Drupal 8 consists of several modules. We should divide them from developer perspective to REST module and REST output from views. There are some other modules like authentication modules for cookies and basic out, and then output into HAL JSON format and XML. There is also, again, a RESTful module from Gizra, but as some of you may say, Gizra is higher level of thinking. It hasn't been actualized for more than a year, so I'm not sure if it will still work, but I'm sure if Gizra will be interested in developing it, they will do it shortly. Now finally let's get to Internet of Things. As definition by International Telecommunication Cheppers says, Internet of Things is network of physical objects. It might be devices, vehicles, buildings, or other items embedded with electronics, software, sensors, and network connectivity. And this enables to collect and exchange data. You may know this as a typical candidate for Internet of Things. It's Raspberry Pi with some other circuits. You may build intelligent homes, build on it, etc. For my use case, I picked up a pickup kiosk. So you order something on a real e-commerce website in your mobile phone or on your desktop, and then you come to the shop or to this kiosk. When you type some authentication number, for example, number of your order and your PIN code, and you will get what you ordered. I really tried to create this application for this kiosk to communicate with e-commerce solution, and I went through some challenges. The first was authentication, then Drupal REST, and on the last place hardware. Let's start with authentication. You probably don't want to enter your email address or your username and password on some of these kiosks, so I decided to create phone number and PIN authentication. This is easily solved by own authentication provider. This is enabled thanks to plugin system in Drupal 8. I picked phone number and PIN because in Slovakia there is branch of electronics shop, and they are authenticating this way, and I see it's like quite good way to authenticate. Now let's talk a little more about that authentication provider. You can create it easily by extending authentication provider interface, and or you can generate it via Drupal console. This is basically just constructor with injected entity type manager, so you can access entities in this authentication provider, and then you have to implement these two methods. The first method applies is used for finding out if this authentication provider applies for this request, and the other method, authenticate, provides authentication itself. So you can get some data from the request, select in this case user with these conditions, and if I find any user, I return its object, otherwise I throw some exception. The other challenge I have to deal with was Drupal REST, because as I said, it wasn't versioned, or it isn't versioned in Drupal 8, and it's not very helpful to have all objects in your, almost all objects in your system accessible via one endpoint. So I decided to solve this problem with two solutions. The first one is views REST output, and the other is custom and custom coded endpoints. The views provides you REST export type of display. You can basically select what fields you want. You can apply filter criteria, like you are building a general views display. You can even set paths, so if I want it, there will be API, version of the API, etc. As you may notice, there is access set to none, and when I was creating this presentation, because it was obviously just for testing purposes, I tried to change it to my authentication provider. I wasn't successful, and I found out that you have to create you have to apply this authentication provider using root subscriber, because Views doesn't have this option inbuilt yet. So you basically create group subscriber which provides you method outer roots, and then you type your condition or select collection you want to modify, modify it, and then set it back. Obviously, it would be more than helpful that we are able to set this authentication provider using UI. There is one issue for that. It's quite long, lasting for 2 years, but it's active, so it will be solved soon, I hope. Let's talk a little about our own endpoints. You can easily generate it again with Drupal console. You will get, you can choose which methods you want to generate, and you basically get this class. Then there are some methods for each method you want to use for this endpoint. After you create this endpoint with your custom logic and application code, you need to enable it. You can do it via REST UI module. It's the first set of pictures. So you basically find your REST endpoint, there is enable button, and you choose which methods do you want to enable, and for each method you can choose supported formats and supported authentication providers. If you don't want to do it through UI, you can modify it in REST settings.yaml file, and it's basically that form in YAML format. The last challenge I have to deal with was hardware. It was probably the easiest one because I was looking for a stable solution, so I obviously picked Raspberry Pi. It's, I think, B+ model. So it was the easiest one. I ran Raspbian operating system on it, and you can easily install standard Apache and full stack on it. So what I learned while I was doing this project, you can do easily decoupling with Drupal8, but it needs some improvements. I think it's a quite viable concept with Internet of Things because, as I showed you in this little project, you can send information to your mobile application, which be also provided some data from your Drupal8 website. And I hope you can maybe provide some examples. What other should you build, or what did you build with Drupal8 and Internet of Things? Thank you for your attention, and if you have any questions.
I could have one. So, okay, there was a Drupal8, what was headless stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, you had the hardware, but what was the user facing thing?
User face was
it also your responsibility, or was it something completely different? I'm just wondering if it was also Drupal or something completely different.
It was Drupal8 as well, but I realized it's not as for real project. I would probably use something else than Drupal8.
Okay. So on both sides, in the headless part and the user-facing part, there was Drupal8. Okay, thanks.
Okay, so
what was the case you did
all? I started working on this when Raspberry Pi $5 model was released, and I started thinking if that $5 model can provide enough power for Drupal8. I didn't realize that it doesn't have internet port and other necessary things for it. It has some output, but you have to create it on hand. I think it should be possible to run it on the model, but I picked this one and build these applications. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Adam, and this will be a presentation about Drupal Goes to College. It will be slightly different from regular Drupal presentations in terms of slides. There will be no code shown here. It will be as non-techy as possible. In the first part, I'm gonna present you sort of a case study of our trip at CEU, that is Central European University, and then later on Balázs will take over, who will talk about a broader overview of higher education and Drupal and their relations. So what is CEU after all? So CEU is a very young and very small university. It is 25 years old and has 14 departments, 2 schools, around 1,400 students from over 100 countries, 400 faculty members from over 50 countries, and the working language is English, which is important because we don't have to build any multilingual sites. Okay, so how it all started. I was the first joining CEU as a Drupalist, and that was 8 years ago. So let's take a look how it was before Drupal at the university. Before Drupal, contractors built one by one sites for the university. So as I mentioned, we have many departments, research centers, administrative units, there is a main site, etc. Each of these were built by external providers. So there was a need for a contract every time we needed a new website, which is a lot of paperwork, there's a lot of back office work involved. They use many different technologies, like these things, right? So it was a wide spectrum of all different technologies, and then working with the university is not really easy. We will see why it is not easy. So because of that, many contractors after a while backed out of their project and contracts, and then the whole cycle began again. You need to find a new contractor, do all the paperwork again, start over the project, and they want to build their own shit, and then they back out from that after a while. It was not too convenient. So this is a university where we have enthusiastic geeks. So they decided, okay, we are going to build a website in Drupal. Okay, we will end this thing of endlessly contracting outsiders, and we will do it in our own. They Googled a lot and found Drupal, and they started to build a proof of concept website in Drupal. And then after a while, well, they were going to replace CEU's main site, ceu.hu by that time, which was by that time a Liferay site. That is also an open source project. We know Liferay. It is written in Java. It is a nice Java CMS, and a third-party company was hosting this thing. They were developing this thing. So, and the turnaround time was something like, if you need a new field, then that's a month and $1,000 and things like that. So they said, we will build this in Drupal. After a while, they worked on it for a year or so. They realized that this is beyond their profession and they need expert help, and then they found me. So by the time I joined them 8 years ago, these were the estimated requirements. Anyone's spider sense is giving alarms by this thing?
Estimation.
So just notice these 2 words in a connection. Okay. So one of those was that we should be able to provision sites as easily and as quickly as possible. New sites. Maybe we want to shoot up a new site every week. The other was that we want to be able to seamlessly share content across all of these sites. So I create a content here and that gets shared to everyone. Then there was the need for a custom look for each site and to host about 40 websites. in one environment. What really a website is was not too clean by then. So first, you might think we used organic groups. Everybody knows organic groups. It is built for this purpose. We have a Drupal instance. We install organic groups. Each website is a group. Goodbye. Well, there were certain problems with this. By that time, organic groups was not capable of serving subdomains, and this was really important for professors. I want a subdomain. cu.edu/whatever is not okay. Whatever.cu.edu, that is what I need. So that was their first very big problem. And there was other things, like there were no site name, slogan, footer message by group. It was not existing then. Yeah, and then they didn't mention a lot of problems which we realized in the meantime, that in organic groups, URL paths will conflict across things sometimes. Fields, image styles, some other things are global too, to the whole instance running this organic groups thing, and there was not too much flexibility in organic groups. So then we discovered domain access, which was by then built for this purpose exactly. Mini sites can use their own domain in domain access, because you can just add a domain with any subdomain or top level domain even, and then domain access will make sure that it will serve the site according to the domain through it was requested. They can have their own email address, site-by-site site name, use different themes, etc., footer message, whatever. And they can publish content the same way as they would with domain access, with organic groups, like create content, article, and then there's a list of domains, and you can check checkboxes to which domain you want to publish this content. So they were very happy. We fixed their problems. They can use their subdomain now, and they can do things. So they become more greedy. And after fixing their really important problems, like using a subdomain, they started to dig deeper and find more problems, resulting in more requests, etc. So, so they came up with questions like, why is this page displayed on this path? I don't like this /list of courses path. I want to use a different path. And why is this path displaying a table and not a list of articles or whatever? So, and then they were concerned about profile listings and image cache styles of profile listings. So, yeah, I like this grid of people, but why is not the images grayscale? I want grayscale images, right? And then they were concerned about, I like this event listing, but why is the event title print first and then the date? No, I want it the other way around, you know? And since they were in one Drupal instance, which were run by domain access, every view was standard across all domains, okay? Which we thought is a great thing. Each course listing looks the same. It's the same table. For them, it was a bad thing. Our unit is unique, okay? If mathematics is displaying this table, then we don't know really what table we want to display, but not that for sure. This was a big problem. So then we said, okay, why not mix panels into this whole thing? Just remember all the modules we mentioned. You know, we already have image cache, we have domain access, we already have content access, for sure. Blah blah blah. Now we pour in panels for the sake of having custom URLs. Now we can create panel nodes, and then we create sensible defaults, which is very relative. We know that, man. And then we can inject panel displays into panel nodes. Okay? We were very happy with this approach. Anybody can have any URL and then any layout in that URL and then put in any panel panes into that URL. Sounds great. So we went with this for a while, which was, we know now, really opening Pandora's box, because requests were just coming in nonstop. I want to change this layout. Why is the sidebar on left? No, I want it on right, you know, and they knew this is possible, so we just kept sending this. Change that here, change that there. And then they had new ideas of, they realized there's a dude sitting in the basement, well, not in the basement, not in the basement literally, but for them it's irrelevant where this guy is sitting. But we know now, we send an email and this dude will make it happen. So let's ask a ton of things, right? We are bright people, this is a university, I have 5 PhDs, I have bright ideas. And they just keep sending the bright ideas, you know? So this represents that pretty much. So over the years, we added more and more modules, more functionality really. We created new content types, new views, and then new custom modules. Sometimes we added crazy redundancy, like creating a content type for the sake of just one domain. And then we had 100 domains in one Drupal installation, but there were content types which were only used by 1 or 2 of them. But that's there for everybody else. Adds clutter to the user interface, slows down the whole site, because a simple node add screen has to select from 34 content types instead of just 3, right? So it became a huge monster. Soon after, our little Drupal looked like this. It was really a developer experience purgatory. Like, you don't want to touch it. Whenever there is something to be changed, you don't want to touch it. You clone it first, and then you touch it, because you never know. We had over 100 domains, little bit below 1,000 blocks, 40 themes, over 70 views with almost 1,000 views displays, thousands of panels everywhere. It was a nightmare. So whenever there was a request, and by now they realized they can ask for things, yeah? So they did. So whenever you have to touch this, you never know, is this view used by only this domain or 20 others too? If I click this cancel button here, will that only influence this site, or will I break the whole thing now? At one point, Ernő was not too focused, and he said, drush this -y views UI. No, and he thought he says views UI, but he said views. Boom. No views for everybody. So. Thankfully, by this time, we had varnish in front of the whole shit. So for half an hour, we were completely safe. Nobody noticed. Only us. But these are the great stories, but just imagine you have a huge monster and you have to work with it, and it's not one Drupal site for one Drupal site, it's one Drupal site for 100 Drupal sites. So whenever you click, you have to be very careful, because you might just destroy 3 sites or 4. Maybe you delete a view, you think this view is not used anywhere, so I can delete it. You delete it, and then the phone rings immediately. Yeah, my port is gone. It was not too great. So then, in parallel with this, by this time, when we had this huge monster for the departments and everything, we realized this is bad. We don't want to add new functionality to this huge thing, because it hurts when I touch it, you know, I don't want to work with this. So then incoming new requests were reconsidered, and we decided, okay, this is a special project. We will build a special individual Drupal instance for this purpose, and we will not build this functionality into the huge monster because it might bite our hands off. So we built a site for Summit University. We built a resume book, which is sort of a special service the university provides for its students, that they are actively seeking jobs for them while they are at the university. So by the time they graduate, they will have opportunities to work at. And then Drupaling was fun again, because after working with this huge monster, working with regular Drupal sites made Drupaling fun again. Drupal worked again, Drupal was fast again, Drupal was simple again. We realized that this is what we want. When we rebuild this thing in Drupal 7, we don't want one huge site. Instead, we want smaller sites, because that's much more manageable. It's easier to maintain. So then when we had the opportunity to rebuild the whole thing in Drupal, we agreed we want smaller sites, we want less complexity, and we want more flexibility. And it was also very helpful that by that time, a communications office was formed within the university, which provided sort of an authority to guide these changes. So earlier it was very hard to work with units because they were empowered to choose whatever design they want to use. So there was no design guide forced upon them. Okay? If I want a purple website, I can have a purple website. There's no corporate identity kit. This is a university. This is not a company. Okay? Here we celebrate open-mindedness and bright, great, good ideas. So if your good idea is to have an orange and purple website, we embrace that. Okay? There's no ruling which says you can't do it because it's ugly. Kind of hurts a little bit. So we decided we want smaller sites, but we still had this major problem that these sites want to share content with each other a lot. So then we introduced this thing which we called the hubs. So when we took a closer look to how they share content across sites, we found that mostly they want to share profiles, news and events, and basic pages are not shared at all, and projects are very rarely shared. So we just kind of boiled this down to people and events and courses they share often. So we said, okay, let's separate these things into a hub, each of its own purpose, and then we introduced the people hub and the course hub, and those are central repositories for that type of content, and then other websites can synchronize content via feeds with that site. And we introduced new functions, like we have a checkbox in each feed item which says unsync, and then from there on, whenever there is a change in the parent item on the hub, it will not be synchronized with the current content on this site, so they can alter things, right? Because usually they say, okay, but on my site, I need to slightly change the description of this course. What then? Then you unsync it, which is a regular on-off checkbox. You edit content, save, a new revision is saved, so you can revert anytime to the synced version, etc. This works for profiles now and courses, and it works very good. We introduced a new field called the fly field. We call it the fly field. It's basically a link field, but you can configure foreign databases for it, into which it takes a look. So we use it for the presenter field in the event content type. We have the people hub. All profiles are stored there. Whenever you create an event on your website, you start typing the name of a dude into the presenter field, which is a link field, and it's the title part of the link field. You start typing the name, and autocomplete looks up the people hub if we have that dude in the people hub, in which case he's a CU employee, right? And then we just simply link to the people hub. And it's a link field. It stores the link. There's a nice autocomplete going on, shows the image of the dude with the name and position, but it's still just a link field. So it's a lightweight, easy to maintain solution. We also have fly beats, which is it's a panel pane, and you can, when you add it, it asks you for a URL and then a jQuery selector, and then upon display, it'll go to that URL, search for that jQuery selector, and whatever it finds there, it'll inject to the content of the panel. So with this, we can do things like, look, grab the page of the person on one website, which lists all of the events where he's a presenter. And then put that as a panel pane into another website, but that content actually never exists there, okay? We just go there, and for that we need to, of course, we need to set up the cross-domain policy and whatever, but we own all these websites, so we can do this easily, right? And these kind of solutions seem to work much better than having one website, which is highly complex and heavyweight. So this is where we are now. We have one main website, 3 hubs. We have many websites sitting in one multi-site instance using Panoply distribution. We have our own distribution, which is sort of a distribution, but not really. It uses Panoply as a base distribution because we need to be highly flexible, right? Any page must have a unique layout. This way they can do it. It's just the in-place editor, choose new layout, do whatever you want. This is bad from other perspective because now we have thousands of customized pages. Nobody uses the defaults. Really bad. So, oh yeah, and the domain access, huge monster that is still alive. It still serves like 50 domains or so. And that's Drupal 6, so it will die, I don't know, in 2 days or 3 maybe.
It's already
Less than a week.
And then 8 is coming, okay, it's not coming, it's here already. So, and we are really, we like Drupal 8, I can tell you that. And after 8 years, we are in a position where all these little Panoply sites are almost literally using the same theme. You can configure it with the color module, sort of, not with the color module, but sort of. But they are using the same theme and they are happy with it. So after 8 years, they finally gave up on, I want another border color. If they use red border color, I want blue border color. You know, they gave up on it. They realized that having a standard look across all the university websites is a good thing. So at least we won that war. And now we are looking towards creating such a great CU main site with organic groups in Drupal 8 that they give up on having their own custom websites. And then Eden is here because we have one website. So for now for us, the main goal is with Drupal nodes is that we reduce the number of websites dramatically. Because I didn't mention that, but we do all this show with 3 people. Yeah. Okay, so that's over 100 sites for 3 Drupalists, which is, we have 4.5 minutes per week for each site. So, thank you. And then Balázs will take over and give this whole story a perspective, hopefully.
So perspective. So my name is Balázs, you probably know me by now. I work for Acquia as a technical architect, which means that I work with various partner organizations, some like Cheppers, some not so good, but we are leading the execution of these builds that in some cases are for higher educational clients. So I think we see kind of the big picture, and thankfully we are involved when we're working for a higher educational institute. We're involved from a very early stage, so we help them figure out what the hell they want, as opposed to just jumping in and being told what we need to do, which is kind of a blessing when you work for an enterprise organization, or at least one that sells itself as such. One of the first challenges, especially with higher educations, but this is actually applicable to other organizations as well, is related to governance. Like, who is the person who will come to you as a developer to do X, Y, and Z, for instance? Because if it's, if anyone, like if Adam and Edna are sitting in the office, and anyone from the next school of, I don't know, gender studies can come there and just tell them what to do, then obviously their long-term architectural plans of having a nice framework and everything standardized just goes tits up immediately. So you have to establish who is the person, and if there is no person in the middle, then you need to tell the client that they need that, because you need to protect people who are actually doing the execution from random people who have excellent and bright ideas, because that prevents you from creating something cohesive that can last over months and maybe a year, like just structurally something good. Building any big complex project is very similar to building a house. You can't just build a house if everyone comes along and says, well, I think you just should make that wall out of glass, or I want a small garden in the living room, and suddenly you can't really build the skyscraper that you really wanted. So it's important to establish who's responsible for what, figure out how that mapping works out for you as a contractor, if you're actually supplying that organization, or if you're employed. It's important to know what you're responsible for and who's going to protect you from being able to deliver that overarching vision or maintain that architecture, so that not too many exceptions come along. For universities or larger organizations where content is really the main selling point, and universities use content basically to sell their courses, what they're doing. So it's, for them, that's how you get to know them as a student. So obviously content creators, who usually are not that important, suddenly become very important, because they are the salespeople of the organization. Again, you have to protect yourself from their stupid little pet demands of making my website purple and bordered with, dashed lines, because within that current framework, you technically just can't put that in. But if you're in direct conversation with that person, then because your responsibility as a developer is to do what you're told, then you have to do it. As opposed to if you're either positioned higher, or there's someone like an architect, or someone the head of the web team who can protect you from that, then that person has higher authority even in a kind of a democratic institution like a university. So the priorities for the client, internal client, is completely different from the priorities of you as a developer. Usually these are a match, but sometimes they aren't, and you have to be prepared for how to handle when they are not. So usually the perception is that when you're entering a university, and I want to work for a university, then there's the head of the IT department, or the director of web technologies or communications, or like a single person that you think would be responsible. But then as soon as you start talking about it, as soon as you start talking to them, then suddenly like random people come up and say, well, yeah, I would like to have this field as well, and I will have like this feature. Oh yeah, by the way, we want to have control of that specific section of the website for ourselves. And then suddenly all of your nice dreams and ideas about having a basic content architecture and no access control goes out of the window when they tell you that, well, I want to be able to change that block, but no one else should be able to change that block on the site. all of these have to be managed. You are the expert in that situation. You know what technically is feasible, and you have to find a way that you can convince the client that if they want it, they have to pay the price, and that price is not necessarily just the time and money it takes for you to develop or configure it, but also the additional costs of maintaining it and extending it, and that really, really adds up in the long run. So in reality, for instance, in a higher education institution, you have departments, you have various offices. They love various offices. You have content teams who are also very vocal about what they want to see. They're usually used to something a little bit more user-friendly than Drupal, from at least content editing perspective. They have no idea of boundaries and responsibilities. They're used to be able to just speak their mind. Of course, you have bright people. We have professors who always know better, and then usually have some internal IT team who understand what the whole thing is about, but they keep to themselves because this web thing is like it's very 2000. So when you're doing all of that work, doing the proper discovery in the project is extremely crucial, not just around governance, but what the hell is that we're trying to achieve, not just from what the user stories are and then really immediately going down to almost a semi-technical level, but also to figure out what individual parties want. Where do they stand internally in the hierarchy, and how can you actually rank maybe the user stories to the degree that you could say, well, maybe content creators they can actually put big pressure on the immediate contact, who's actually the person responsible for paying us, or that professor of philosophy has really no leverage, so whatever he says in the meetings can be practically ignored. But discovering all of that is extremely important, but also the approaches that you're trying to propose and evaluating what their implications are going to be. Like making an architectural decision during the discovery has an extremely long-lasting impact. If you, for instance, choose a solution like domain access or something that, or even for a really basic example, you want to have separate user groups and roles in the system, so you want to have permissions configured for them. But you know that as soon as you start, maybe you have 20, 50, 100 modules, you suddenly have, let's say, at least 200 permissions in your permissions table. Now, then at that point, you know that every single user group that you're adding to the system, every single role, is going to add 100 more checkboxes to that bloody table. So if you agree to all of that requirement, suddenly you have to blow up your the amount of variables that your service provider can accept as a HTTP post request, because that permissions table is just going to be too large to submit. And suddenly you can't even perceive how much complexity it is.
You can no longer memcache them because they run out of the bin.
Exactly. So it's just like the whole thing is no longer scalable because all of those, like you have to evaluate what the technical impact of each of that request is going to be. You have to really quickly know what's going to happen if you say yes to something. And if you say no, you have to really defend that argument. Obviously, these are smart people that have been working at the university, so they must be very smart, right? Well, not necessarily. And especially if Drupal 8 is in the picture. I don't know how many of you has been working with Drupal 8 projects already. It came out, I think, in November or October. November, right?
19th of November.
Right. So it's been out, right? So it's stable, right? We can build it, right? So would you be okay? Would you be okay with like saying let's install organic groups in that project? How many people would be comfortable with that? Right. So organic groups is not going to have a stable release until summer.
CHX is working on it.
Yeah, exactly. So it doesn't have I don't know. Maybe it has an alpha or beta release. So a lot of the projects. Panels doesn't have a stable release, which means things change and things magically break, and it's a whole new world objects and classes, like you can no longer just dump the menu structure because it's going to have a few random hashes and good luck understanding what the hell that means. So, the long story short, every decision that you make has a fundamental impact of your delivery timeline. If you agree to organic groups and suddenly you run into a bug, then what are you going to do? Like, you will have to be delayed because you have to either wait for a fix or fix it yourself. But if you're choosing something like organic groups, that CHX is saying it's not going to come out for a few months, then there's a good chance that you're not going to fix in 2 days, right? So the long story short is that understanding what the client wants, understanding what they need, and what you can feasibly deliver and what their impact is the biggest priority of the discovery. But of course, you can't really do that properly without understanding why they are asking for this. In the enterprise world, this person is called the business analyst. Usually this is a non-technical person. What they are asking really is, okay, so you want, this layout has to be, you want a slideshow instead of a table, fine, but why? And that's what these people do. They keep asking why. Because the biggest question is, the biggest importance here is to understand what does a business gain. And at this point, you're really not really an IT person there. You're trying to figure out if this shit that they're asking for is really important. Is there some legitimate reason, or is it just pure bullshit that they, like, we want to be different? Which can be justified because they could say, well, if we can prove that we're different, we receive 50% more funding, or we receive more students, which is fair and it's understandable. But if they say, well, I want to embed, for instance, Flash into my WYSIWYG, and you ask why, and they can't really give you a valid answer, then you do not have to introduce a cross-site scripting vulnerability on their site, which is a good deal if you present them with that option. For instance, asking like, who needs access to the website, and sometimes they want, oh, on our university website, we want this hidden space for people to collaborate, and then you wonder, so why not the intranet? Oh, why? Because the internet doesn't work. But then
We don't like the internet.
Oh, we don't like the intranet. Yes.
The internet is blue.
For instance, it's not really a valid business reason why to add maybe 2, 3, 4 weeks in addition to the project to create a complete access controlled area to the site, which, by the way, affects the rest of the website because there's no such thing as just building next to your Drupal installation. You're making the whole thing complex. So you make it probably use memory, the user interface is going to be cluttered, and so on and so on. And Adam's already talked about how bad things get when they become too complex. So understanding if there's a real business need, or it's just people's stupidity or short-sightedness, can help you actually achieve the discovery a little bit better. Obviously, when you talk to them, you can't call them stupid straight to their face, but
Their enthusiasm gets you.
yeah, the other risk, or the other trap with Drupal is that what we sell with Drupal usually is that you can do everything, right? It's open source, you can do everything. It's all open. There are all these contributed modules. And a lot of these clients that we work with, they're coming from a pre-packaged software where they got delivered the software like SharePoint, where they were told by the salespeople, this is the feature list, this is what you're going to get. When we go to the client and we tell them, well, here's Drupal, it can do anything, what do you want? And they like go completely crazy because they're not product managers, they're not product creators, they are not business analysts or architects. They're dreaming. So our job really is to crush their dreams and tell them, no, you can't have that because X, Y, and Z. But it's all about setting their expectations right in the first place. If you set their expectations so that with Drupal you can do everything, then you're expected to deliver everything. And that's usually the downfall as well, because we know that you can't do everything without punishment. You can do a lot of things, but there's a cost associated to it. So when you make a decision, there's an implication. When you're engaging with the client, you also have to think about, okay, so we built this fairly complex Drupal website, maybe with organic groups, clients like that, universities like it a little bit more. But what's going to happen once we leave? Like, we built this crap, but we go and, we're just going to light it on fire and leave. That's not really good client management, right? So if you do that, you're not really going to get any more business from them. Plus, it's just bad overall. I mean, that's just bad thing. Like, we shouldn't do bad things. We have to think about these things with the mindset of, we're trying to make these people successful. We're trying to the business word for this is we're trying to set them up for success. And we can't really the reason why we need to convince these people, I mean the clients, about what we're trying to do is because we want to do right by them. We don't want to cheat them. We don't want to give them something that's completely crap, at least not intentionally. So you need to figure out how the handover is going to be. I've built a site. Who is going to maintain that from now on? If I introduce this dependency, I build this really fancy build process, which is going to download everything from Composer or make file and compile it, and then commit that artifact into the repo and push it into an unnamed enterprise hosting company. Then who is going to maintain that once I leave? Like, who owns maybe the Travis instance? Who owns the private GitHub repo? What happens if I leave the project? Who's going to do that, right? And if I leave at that point and I didn't think about it, I didn't explain that we are doing this to make the actual project more successful, but you're technically not equipped to handle it, then the client is going to fail. I leave the project and the client will be like, whoa, can I change this color to white? And then maybe you actually get to answer like, yeah, it's a code change. You can pay $200 per hour for us to fix it. And then they're like, yeah, well, this is not what we thought we could get because we were sold flexible templates that we can change to whatever they wanted to. So you need to identify who's going to maintain it. Do they have enough developers? Maybe you're the first technical person they ever talked to because previously they just got Microsoft sales guys who sold them the SharePoint instances. So once you depart, who is going to take over? Is there someone else that you could train while you're building the site? Are there developers actually on site? Do they have a web team? Do they have architects? Do they have any testers? Any QA, UAT happening? Or you just push things out without testing? You need to set the client up for success. You can't just leave. The other really important aspect of any project, really, and this is not just higher education, is to avoid complexity at all costs. This is why we are setting everything up with the business analysts work, with the discovery, to understand the bare minimum of complexity that we have to build into the system. Nobody fully understands a complex framework like Drupal. A lot of people are experts in Drupal 7 or sections or maintainers of Drupal 8, but nobody fully really understands. And I think we were kind of fooling ourselves to fully understand Drupal 7 already, and Drupal 8 is way, way more complex than that. So any complexity like adding a new user role impacts the system. Adding a new content type impacts not just the system, but impacts performance. In Drupal 7, I don't know if you knew that, but if you introduce a new content type, it's going to generate at least 10 or 20 more menu entries into the menu router system, because it has fields that have manage field, edit field, and all the fields that are associated with the content type suddenly appear in the menu system. So if you just carelessly introduce a bunch of new content types and you run up to 100, suddenly you can't really rebuild the menu because you've run out of memory. So suddenly, if somehow someone clicks the clear all cache button, the website will collapse. It can happen, but it's an honest mistake because we never really think about how the complexity is impacting the system. So that is why, partially, we have to avoid it. And in general, because of all the impacts that we do understand, it's the UX clutter, for instance. If we add use domain access, it sounded like a good idea at first, but suddenly when you add the 20th domain and then on your content type platform, you have to choose from 20 domains, and there's a slight chance that an editor is making a mistake and deleting or editing content to the wrong place. Those things are introduced because of the complexity. When you somehow are convinced that the client needs that secure section on the website, and you've introduced access control, that's again complexity. That, for instance, if you introduce access control in Drupal 7, you lose the block caching. Those are things that are impacted directly because of that requirement that you accepted. And not only that, but the project management is not going to get things done. Developers are going to get frustrated because things are just really, really complex. I mean, working with something where you change one tiny thing that you think you understand and completely unrelated to that, 50 other things break, is a really bad feeling. So you don't want to touch that. It's a constant stress. So developers, after a few months or years, will just stand up and say, fuck this shit, I'm going to work on something simple. They're just going to burn out. And it's just human nature. We're afraid of doing things that are risky. Like running Drush disabled views is a really good example. In theory, you should never really have to touch the production environment. But if you say you can't justify to upper management that we actually need separate environments for like development or maybe a testing environment. Oh, by the way, for actually maintaining that, we need 2 more people. And they were going to say no. Well, the only tool that you're left with is to run Drush disabled views on the production environment. And yes, people make mistakes. And that makes people stressed. So,
and then they make more mistakes.
And then they make more mistakes, or they just leave. And they leave with all the knowledge of how that site actually worked in the first place. And if you're talking about a complex site like with CU, that's a big loss because nobody really understands anymore how the hell those domains and views were actually functioning. Or, I mean, in this case, Adam didn't really talk about outsourcing work. But if you have a complex site with maybe 100 domains and you're trying to create a custom theme, how are you going to get a contractor on board? Like, you have a database that's maybe 20 gigabytes large. And that's just a database. So what if you want to revolve the database? You know, that workload on that contractor is going to increase so much that it's actually calculable in triple-digit percentages how much more work that person has to do, how much work. It's not actual work, it's just sitting at his laptop waiting for the database to import for every single thing that he's trying out. It's nuts. So complexity is impacting everything from performance to project management to the life expectancy of the developers. It's just bad for everyone. And because of this, if you do the discovery right, you can actually identify what the business needs are so that you can build the right platform for the right people. And that's what, for instance, led Adam and his team to building individual small websites for individual internal customers because they realize that they don't need all of the extra things. We can bridge that gap by soft integrations or deep integrations when necessary, but the thing that is going to give them the most business value, we can build very simply. Content ownership in most of these organizations which have content first, which basically they're selling their own content, and by selling I don't actually mean that they're charging money, but that's how they get money from students. They show that they're producing materials. Universities typically do that because they have to do publications, but news organizations are very similar. News and media is basically the same. Once you identify who can create content as part of the discovery process, you can restrict and identify those smaller silos that can be built properly as opposed to one single huge and complex system where you have to introduce maybe 2-3 layers of access control, which no one really understands how it works because you have maybe the user permission system in Drupal core, then you have domain access and maybe organic groups, and how those three will combine at the very end, it's impossible to test individually, and if you wanted to create automated tests, then you can calculate how many variations you would need to test to have 100% fail-proof test coverage, which again, with additional complexity, increases, and then that complexity impacts the amount of tests that you have to create. Complexity sometimes is unavoidable. You have to justify, you have to understand what that complexity is going to mean, what it's going to, how much it's going to cost you and the business. And once you understand it, you have to be able to explain that to them. Once you make a decision, it's hard to go back from there. You know, it's not as simple as to run Drush disable domain access. We've all been there. Well, I haven't, but I recommended clients against it. And then they went bankrupt. So it's not a good idea to, I mean, it's justifiable to have complexity, but the business impact, the technical debt is going to be there, and everybody needs to be aware of that. The other important aspect of, once you nail down who is responsible for what the business roles are, usually it comes down to content, how the content is going to be structured on the site. So you have to focus on understanding the information architecture of the site as well. And by the way, nowhere really at this point did I talk about really hardcore Drupal technical stuff. And this is not what you usually do when you try to discover what the client needs or what they do. So all of this is just talking, it's just questions and asking, figuring out what they want, what you can give them, and through some technical know-how, figuring out how much it will cost. So you need to figure out how the site content is structured. In Drupal, we know that Drupal has content first. You know, you have really nice content structures. You have nodes, you have fields, you have blocks, you have entities everywhere now with Drupal8, which is great. Except that the clients used SharePoint before, and all they understand is directory hierarchy. So they understand that page A is underneath page B. They don't really get this thing with nodes. Like, what do you mean, Mike, I can't put my sub-page under the previous page? How does that even work? So you have to work through the client, make them understand what that transition means and how that content is going to look like. And because they're not experienced in that, they haven't designed information architecture before, you actually have to do that for them and with them. You have to come up with a good organizational structure for the content. I mean, in some cases, you might think that, well, they're used to this tree-like hierarchy. I know another one in Drupal, it's called the menu system. It's going to be great, right? So why not just put everything into the menu? Like we could just have one menu called content menu and just put all the nodes in there, right? Like news even. What's the problem with that? Well, suddenly if 10 content creators start pumping in content and maybe they generate 100 nodes per month, and in a year it's 1,000 nodes in your menu system. Again, completely blowing what the menu system was intended in the first place, and creating such a memory impact that you can't flush the cache on your website anymore, which is a bad thing. So you need to figure out, for which structure, what's the best match in Drupal? Is it an organic group maybe, because it has access control? Is it some other form of entity reference, like taxonomy terms? Is it actually menu? Sometimes it makes sense, but for dynamic content it doesn't. So then you need to think about, how do I relate taxonomy terms to menu entries? And these are all sorts of interesting questions that you need to think about at that spot, because you have to be able to scale, right? Then you have to think about how to structure the page. You have sidebars and top headers and content area, but maybe the client wants to rearrange it. Maybe they want to manage separate blocks. They don't want to manage blocks through block management, because we all know that the Drupal 7 block management sucks. So you want to do something better, like panels. So let's just create all the blocks and plugins into panels and to see those content types, which is cool, right? As soon as you reach like 1,000, because that starts to break down there as well, like having each views and then all the custom things in there starts breaking down. This is a lot of work. Identifying all of this is a lot of work already on the existing site, but you have to do it out of due diligence. You have to look through the legacy sites that they want to convert, and you have to understand where they're coming from and what is that they're trying to replicate, and flag all of these issues that, while suddenly we have two variations of the same block, is that yet another block? Is that maybe something that can be customized, can be made dynamic? So forth. Yeah, when with Drupal you can do everything, right? And you can actually tell the client, well, you can define your own content architecture, and that's priceless experience. But practically, blessed are the meek means it's blessed are the stupid. So the less you know, the better. Unfortunately, this is a really pejorative way of saying that you have to manage expectations. You have to, you can't just tell the client you can do everything with Drupal, because it's not true. Because I can't do everything with Drupal, and neither can you. And although we can do a lot of things, but everything comes at a cost, and at the end, neither of us will be happy. If I do what you ask me to do, I will not be happy, and you will not be happy either in the long run. So you have to promise them what you can actually deliver. And then lastly, but not least, you have to explore what sort of integrations are going to be there. The example that Adam gave you on content integration is a really good one. There are various, especially with universities, they usually have a large amount of internet-facing properties, and they always want to synchronize content. They always want these, like, I want my profile, I want professors, I want publications on everything, and you have to figure out what's coming from there. This is not necessarily just about higher education projects. Figuring out integrations is perhaps 1/10 or 10-20% of an enterprise project discovery process. We're just figuring out where is data coming from, where is it going to, and who is in control. Am I just a consumer of that data? Am I actually contributing it back? Is there some synchronization? I don't know, some of you may have heard about the Content Hub product that Accu is building, which is built out of the exact same business need. It's a very complex area that needs to be explored, and all of these questions have to be asked to the client who logs in. For instance, like suddenly you have 10 websites, they have, I don't know, 2,000 websites. Are you going to maintain a user account on each of them? Isn't that, tedious? You want SS, like single sign-on? Maybe if you want that, you probably already introduced yet another web infrastructure into the whole ecosystem. Is there going to be someone who's maintaining it? There's a technical and cost implementation cost associated to that. Again, complexity is building up, not necessarily on the application level, but also on the organization level as well. So, sorry we overran a little bit, hopefully it wasn't too boring. But the conclusion is that keep it simple and build a bare minimum that people think they want. As soon as they start using the system, it's new to them anyway, right? They probably came to Drupal in the first place. So if you build something simple and do not over-engineer it, then they'll start playing around with it, and they will discover that they can do X, Y, and Z, or they realize that they actually are not using X, Y, and Z. So the least over-engineering work you have to put in there, the better for everyone. As soon as you start iterating and improving over time and figuring out what really works, the better off everyone is going to be, because the business impact at that point is really justified, because people have used the system already, they know what they want, and it's not just the first time that they saw paragraphs module, for instance, in place, and they want, I don't know, 100 types of paragraphs before they even started producing content. You need to think about how and things will be governed, who is responsible for what. Is there someone protecting your developers or your a delivery team, even your project management needs some protection sometimes. And you have to constantly iterate over the scope and the backlog. And lastly, but not least, especially when there's a large organization that has their first encounter with Drupal, handover and who's going to take over once you're gone is equally important. And it's going to establish you as, again, this is I know it's an enterprise buzzword, but kind of a strategic partner for the account, because you are constantly looking out for what they want, and it's not for your immediate benefit. But if they're benefiting and they're building a healthy business and they want more Drupal stuff, sooner or later they're going to come back to you because you helped them on that way. So it's better for everyone. Thank you.